Happy Halloween, gamers! What do you think of my costume? I'm an idea. No, I can't do the voice. Anyway, I was thinking about what to do to celebrate the occasion, and that's when I thought of something spooky I enjoyed as a little zygote. Creepypastas. Scary spaghetti. Or nowadays, I guess the closest thing would be like analog horror content for your dad. Growing up, I read a ton of these things, even watched a bunch of YouTube videos about them, either people reading them or talking about them and how scary they were. Allegedly. But, most of the ones I read growing up were, no bueno, to say the least. Really, what made some of them scary was the images that sometimes went with them. Majora's Mask has been ruined for some people forever because of this thing. But to celebrate, I decided I wanted to take a crack at writing my own authentic, honest video game creepypasta like you would find back in the day. Among the greats, like Ben Drowned and Sonic.exe. Oh, and there won't be any visual elements of this, both so you can just leave this on in the background and let your mind's eye peep the horror. So without further ado, settle in. And try not to piss your pants. And get ready for this. What's your favorite video game? If you asked me that before, I would have said it was Pokemon Ruby. But after what happened to me, now I don't want anything to do with that damn franchise. It was back in March of 2018. I was 16 at the time. It was sunny out, just starting to get comfortably warm after winter, and I was just leaving school for the weekend. "Hey, Philip!" I heard a voice say from behind me. Philip is my name, so I turned around to see who it was. It was my best friend Tony. "How's my best friend doing?" Tony said, slinging an arm around my shoulders as we walked. "I'm doing okay, Tony," I said to Tony as we walked out of school. We walked down the block together, back to the neighborhood we lived at. It wasn't a far walk, and it meant our parents could save on gas money since they didn't need to drive us. "Hey, check it out," Tony said, pointing down a side street we don't usually walk down. I followed his arm to see where he was pointing, and saw that someone was having a yard sale. "It's a yard sale," Tony said. I nodded. Tony and I walked down the street towards the yard sale. It was being run by an old woman. A thin, decrepit-looking woman with noticeable veins protruding through her skin and glassy eyes, as if she was blind and old. "Hi there," Tony said as we got into the yard sale. "There's a lot of stuff here." "Yes indeed, dearie," the old lady said, her voice soft and yet loud enough to be heard clearly. "Feel free to take your time, and don't feel pressured to buy anything." I noticed that when the woman was speaking, she was looking right at me, even though she was blind. But maybe I just assumed she was blind. I looked over the table she had set out. It was quite the selection, although I couldn't see a price tag anywhere. I hoped the old lady wouldn't try to haggle, as I'd probably crumble immediately under the pressure. "I found a Playboy from the 80s, Tony said. I ignored him. I continued to peruse the old woman's things, noticing her watching me out of the corner of my eye every so often. I ignored her, and then I saw it. It was a small red gleam in a box labeled Kids. I reached in and grabbed it, and I gasped at what I found. In a red jewel cartridge, it was a near mint copy of Pokemon Ruby for the Game Boy Advance. I reached for it. I had one just like it growing up, but I lost it at a friend's sleepover. That is, if someone didn't steal it at the time. "It belonged to my grandson," the old lady chimed in as I stared at the cartridge. "He doesn't need it anymore." "He grow out of it?" I said, offering a smile to the woman. Oh, something like that, the lady responded, giving me a small smile in return. Yeah, Pokemon sucks now. It hasn't been good since Diamond and Pearl, Tony chimed in. How much? I asked the woman. Nowadays, the GBA Pokemon games cost an arm and a leg, so I was hoping the old woman wouldn't charge me too much. For you, dear, take it. It's not getting much use here, she said, smiling oldly. My jaw nearly dropped. Oh no, I couldn't, I say, half shocked. Please, let me pay you something for it. I reached for my wallet despite the old woman's protests. Then I pulled out a single bill and handed it to her. It was $1. I insist, I say, with a friendly smile. The old woman made a strange expression when I handed her the $1. Thank you, she said quietly. What was with that response? Weirded out, I decided it was time to go. Tony and I left and headed to our houses. We reached Tony's first, and after dapping up my boy for real, I headed home. I inserted my house key into the door of my house and headed inside. The door to my house was made of wood and painted black. It had a handle and a lock. Both looked like they were gold, but they were actually brass or something. Mom? I called out once I locked the black wooden door with brass handles behind me. No response. Not unusual, though. Mom worked until 5 and it was only 3:30. I tossed my bag onto the couch before heading into the kitchen. I opened up a cupboard and pulled out a jar of Jif peanut butter and started eating it with my hands. As I did, I thought about the old woman and the weird look she gave me when I paid her $1 for Pokemon Ruby. I shook my head before setting down the peanut butter and reaching into my pocket, smiling at the copy of Ruby. I can't wait to play this game, I said before running up the stairs to my bedroom. I entered my room. I saw my DS Lite on my nightstand, but I wanted to experience the game authentically. What can I say? I'm a purist at heart. Haha. I dug around my closet and then I found it. My old atomic purple Game Boy Advance SP, complete with all the stickers I put on it as a kid. I pulled out the copy of Pokemon Emerald already in the slot, and I tossed it back into my closet. Then, I headed over to my bed. I inserted the copy of Pokemon Ruby, and I powered on my Game Boy. The Game Boy still had full power, and I laid back on my bed as I got ready to game. The familiar chime came from the Game Boy speaker as the words Game Boy Advance appeared on the screen and gleamed. I grinned toothily. The familiar opening music played, along with the shot of the leaf with a raindrop rolling down it. Though curiously, the raindrop was a bit redder than I remembered, and the sky a bit darker. It was probably just my Game Boy Advance SP Atomic Purple being old. I pressed start to skip the rest of the intro, and saw there was already a save file still on the cartridge. Made sense, but the name threw me off. It was Phil. A shortened version of Philip, which is my name. The second thing that caught my eye was the playtime. It was at 666 hours. Someone was a big fan of this game, it seemed. But the third thing that caught my eye was their Pokédex. They didn't even finish the National Dex. They were like 12 away even though they had well over 600 hours. I scoffed, but decided to open the save anyway to check it out. Maybe they had some shinies or event-only legendaries. The game loaded up. I was met with the male Ruby and Sapphire trainer Brendan, or in this case Phil, standing in his bedroom. Maybe the last time the game was played they had just defeated the Elite Four rematch or something. I opened my menu to check my team. When I did, my jaw dropped. The only two Pokemon on the team were a level 100 Groudon and a Bad Egg. Bad eggs usually happen when you try to cheat the game. They're relatively harmless provided you don't mess with them. Seems like whoever played this before was a little troublemaker. I closed the menu and made my character walk downstairs. Weirdly though, the player's mom wasn't in the house. I raised my eyebrow. How was I supposed to heal without her? I shrugged in real life and exited the house. When I did, my jaw dropped at what I saw. Little Root Town was empty. And I didn't mean there was nobody around. I mean, aside from the player's house, there was nothing. What kind of hacks did this dude do? I said out loud. I shrugged and kept playing. Since there was nothing to do in town, I headed north to where Route 101 would be. When I entered, I noticed some things were different. First, the grass tiles had all but been replaced by the ashy grass tiles, like the ones near Fall Arbor Town. The second thing I noticed was the route. Instead of 101, it was 4311. The routes don't go that high, I said, rolling my eyes. But I kept playing. I ran around the grass, checking to see if the encounters were the same. I ran around for what felt like minutes. Curiously, the ash never left the grass no matter what. Then, I finally ran into a wild Pokemon. And what I saw made my jaw drop. It was a wild Zigzagoon, but it looked off. It was proportioned more like a real raccoon. It threw me off and made me deeply uncomfortable, but what was even weirder was the blood. It looked as though its fur had blood caked in places, visible even through the Game Boy's crappy screen. But the blood wasn't pixelated. It looked almost real. "This is a kid's game," I said with a gasp. My trainer sent out the Groudon in my party, but it was all wrong. Like Zigzagoon, it was proportioned more like a real Groudon, but its red carapace was instead replaced with more fleshy, realistic-looking bits. It was bleeding blood. The sight of the red liquid that should have been on the inside being on the outside terrified me. And its name wasn't Groudon anymore, but Meatdon. But the scariest part was that, even though its health was full, its health bar was red, like blood. Panting, I chose Fight, but it only had one move, Bludgeon. It was a fighting type move, with 30 PP. When I checked the summary, my jaw dropped. It had 100 base power and accuracy, but what was scarier was that it had the physical attack icon. "The physical special split didn't happen until Gen 4, I cried out. I chose the move, and what happened next rocked me to my core. My jaw dropped, and I sobbed as my Meatdon attacked, and even now, I just can't bring myself to describe what happened. When it was done, I was shaking and crying, and my Pokemon gained 12 EXP since Zigzagoon was only level 3. I continued to play the game, but decided to turn back. I ran back south to Little Root Town. As I ran, I felt the path took longer than necessary. I felt like I was running for hours in real life. And as I kept running, the music changed. It was becoming more distorted and off-key. It sounded horrible, but scarier than that, it sounded too high quality for the Game Boy Advance SP's sound card and crappy speaker. When I finally got back to town, everything had gone gray, like the ash near Fall Arbor Town in Route 113. I ran to my house, but I froze. The house looked destroyed now, like it had been ransacked. No, burgled. Panic began to set in. I ran into the house and saw something truly awful. It was a first-person view now, and it looked hyper-realistic, realer than real life even. How was this possible on the Game Boy Advance SP? I could only sob, as inside the house was a real-looking Meatdon using a wooden plank to bludgeon not the player's mom, but the player's dad. My father. 10 years ago, when I was 6 years old, my father was murdered in a home invasion gone wrong. He was home alone, so there were no witnesses to help him. He was killed by 2 crackheads, one with an eye patch and no teeth, and one with long brown hair and really long fingernails. They apparently killed him by beating his head in with a wooden plank 66 times, until his head was nothing but paste. I found out the details of what happened a week later, when my mom was sure I could handle the information. When she told me, it made me sad. I cried as I watched Meat Dawn beat Dawn my father's head. In a panic, I grabbed my cell phone and sensibly called for help. "Hey, best buddy," Tony said when he picked up the phone. "Call the police and send them to my house. There's no time to explain," I shouted before hanging up and continuing to watch Meat Dawn violently murder my father. When it was over, Meat Dawn then turned to the first-person point of view. Then, in the most awful, garbled, dark voice, it spoke. "I killed your father just like in real life." "What are you?" I screamed at my atomic purple Game Boy Advance SP. "I am the arbiter of judgment, the morning star, the omega to all life. I am your worst fears manifest in such a way where you are helpless. I am God." And then I screamed as Meat Dawn's hand reached out of the Game Boy before pulling me inside. The last thing I ever heard was Meat Dawn laughing evilly. I headed over to my best friend Philip's house after I got his phone call. The police were already there, as was Philip's mom, who was crying. I think she was sad. As the police consoled her, I pushed open the black door with brass or gold handles and walked upstairs to Philip's room. Inside, I saw that his bed was covered in red. Was it blood? I gulped. I walked over to his bed and saw his Game Boy Advance SP. I took it, smiling. Philip always loved this thing. I pulled out the game cartridge and tossed the Game Boy onto the floor. When I read the name of the game, my jaw dropped. It wasn't Pokemon Ruby, but Pokemon Blood Red Ruby. So what'd you think? Scary, huh? What about the bad egg? How'd Philip write the story? What are you talking about? If something was weird or didn't make sense, it was because of the supernatural, alright? It's scary. That's how horror writing works. I watch Gravity Falls, I know how to write. Clearly, you just lack media literacy and don't understand what you're watching. You guys don't like it because you are toxic and are being immature haters. You need media literacy. I win, you lose. This is my magnum opus. I am God. Bye-bye.